I think
Okay.
it's really helpful and important to meet people in the community that would generate referrals for you that you could also work with. So, locating space in a building with other medical or mental health professionals that may not do exactly what you do, but do services where you would be sharing similar clients, I think can be really helpful.
On this episode of the CompassionWorks Way, we'll hear Jordan speak to Amanda Martin for the second time. Amanda holds a PhD in family therapy. She's a licensed professional counselor, licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor, and an MDRIA-approved consultant for EMDR. Amanda has over 14 years of experience working and specializing with people and families who've experienced trauma both in residential and outpatient settings. In this episode, Jordan and Amanda continue the conversation on starting a private practice, and Amanda goes into more detail on the kinds of trainings, skill sets, and where you should focus your attention once you leave grad school. You can learn more about Amanda by visiting our website, CompassionWorks.com, or Amanda's practice website, AmandaMartinCounseling.com. You can also stay connected with Amanda online on Instagram at Amanda Martin Counseling PLLC. Now let's get into the episode. Welcome to the CompassionWorks Way, featuring insightful discussions, inspiring stories, and expert interviews on mental health, building your practice, and personal and professional growth. This show is brought to you by CompassionWorks, your hub for therapists, mental health professionals, and seekers of holistic healing. Your host, Jordan Schaefer, founder of CompassionWorks and licensed EMDR therapist. Together, we'll create a world where compassion and understanding transform lives. CompassionWorks, empowering therapists and transforming lives. Now let's get into the episode.
So Amanda and I are here today. We're going to continue our conversation on how to start a private practice, but then we're going to go into talking about the kind of trainings or skills or where you should focus your attention once you left grad school, got your degree, and started practicing, where you need to put your attention. But let's go into, you mentioned two things, Amanda, and one was locating yourself around professionals or getting to know other professionals. Can you say a little more about that? Yes, I think
Okay.
it's really helpful and important to meet people in the community that would generate referrals for you that you could also work with. So, locating space in a building with other medical or mental health professionals that may not do exactly what you do, but do services where you would be sharing similar clients, I think can be really helpful. So, meeting other professionals that do psychiatry, psychological testing, chiropractic, holistic, integrative medicine. These are all areas where oftentimes they're going to refer for mental health services. And also, you would typically refer clients that are going to come to you to other professionals that they may need some assistance in these areas. So it's great to have that relationship and to be in close proximity. Okay, and then do you actually go meet those people? Didn't you do that? Didn't you get a either office with a psychiatrist or in the same building? But would you recommend going and meeting the other people? How what would you do there? Yeah, I like to meet them, but I also want to make sure that we have similar thoughts on treatment. Some people
Oh,
that you may refer to may treat very vastly different than you do. So I don't tend to refer to a lot of doctors that I know are heavy on prescribing benzodiazepines. I feel like that obviously can interfere with some of the work that we're doing. I'm not against it. It's not typically where I would send someone if I know that they tend to prescribe a lot of Medicaid or heavy Medicaid, things like that.
okay.
So I like to kind of get to know them and see how they operate and how they conceptualize treatment and health. Also, they're going to want to know what services I provide. And if I provide services that they don't really value or think is worth anything, then that's going to come out at some point in some way, right? When they're treating the client, I think that can put the client in a place of conflict. Not that they have to agree with everything we do, but you do kind of want to have a professional relationship and understanding of services that you both provide and find that interesting and
Okay.
valuable.
So it's networking, but it's also getting to know the people and letting them know what you're doing to see if there's a match.
Yes.
Okay.
And then what are your thoughts on starting a private practice or getting to where you don't take insurance? I mean, do you think some people start in taking insurance and then move away from it, or some may never take insurance? What's your take on that?
I think so. Knowing your area, and so doing a little bit of kind of a market analysis on your own, just checking to see how many places in your area do or don't take insurance. It's if you're just coming out of newly licensed, have your associate license, it's a great time to never take insurance because you can't take insurance at that time anyway,
Right.
unless you're working under someone that does and it's approved by that insurance company. So it's a great way just to start off, and you don't take insurance. And then when you get your license, you don't take insurance. If you start off taking insurance, then you just want to make sure that as you transition, you give enough notice to your clients, explaining why you're no longer going to be taking insurance so they understand, providing referrals for places that do. So if that's something they're going to need to continue with a provider that does take insurance, they have a place to go. And then also making sure that you're informing the insurance, right, that contract needs to end and following those guidelines.
Well, do you take insurance, or did you? Or
Do not.
Oh, you don't? I broke up there. Did you ever take insurance?
I did when I worked for agencies, and when I worked for one other doctor, I took insurance through their office. When as for my own business, I've not taken insurance. I'm pretty transparent about it. I even have a section on my webpage explaining why I don't. I also have a lot of training in different modalities that is typically not paid for by insurance. So what I find is that if you take insurance, but you provide other services that are not covered by insurance, you're going to have clients that could benefit from those services, but then they don't really get those provided because their insurance won't cover it. So if you don't take insurance, then it kind of opens them up to being able to use any service that you provide because they already have that understanding that this office doesn't take insurance, and they can still submit the super bill and the coding, and I am clear that, on certain services like neurofeedback, it's hard to get reimbursed with insurance. But they know that up front, they know that going in.
And you've been okay not taking insurance. You've had enough clients.
Yes, I stay busy.
Okay. Well, let's talk now about the idea of when you get through with school, become licensed, associate licensed, or licensed. What are areas that you think maybe you've developed in, or you think people would benefit from, therapists, in learning more about, kind of staying up with?
So I think when you get out of school, it's one, really exciting because you're done with papers and you're getting to start to practice on your own. I think the hard part with that is coming up with a plan. Not that you can't learn lots of things, because we learn our whole life, but I think coming up with a plan on what is it that you're wanting to continue to grow in. When you're starting out, you want to know everything about everything, or you want to pick this population, but because you're starting out, you can tend to take clients from all different types of populations. And then you're scrambling to try to figure out what's the best way to provide care in these different areas. So sometimes that can be handled through supervision and sometimes not. So I think it's really important if you're going to be working for yourself or working under an agency and there is a specific target population of who you're going to be working with, start identifying the trainings that is going to help you grow in that area first. You can still add trainings of things that you're interested in or that you want to grow into as well. But I would start to focus in on what you're actually doing the most of right now and get better at that. So if you're working in a population, like when I started off, I started working with an advocacy center and then started my work in residential. I focused in on training in complex trauma because those populations typically had complex trauma and PTSD symptoms and diagnoses. So I think that's important to kind of identify who is your target client population.
Okay. All right. So you go after your target population first, and then what you're really interested in second.
Initially, yes.
Initially, okay. And for you, it was working with trauma, complex trauma. Can you talk about some of the trainings you've taken in that, or how does that go?
So in the agency work, obviously, we did a lot of training in the cognitive behavioral trauma focused cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy. EMDR was one that when we added in that training, that gave us the best outcomes in the treatment center that I was at when we were reporting outcomes to the state. And so that's really furthered my career in EMDR just because I saw how impactful it was for the population. And I do think learning more about the brain and the body is also really important. Most of the time, that population is having medication and different things that are going on. So it's good for you to have some knowledge. You still have your own lane. You can't practice medicine with a mental health license, but I think it's good for you to have information on that. So that's where the neurofeedback came in, and some of the trainings I've done with Amen clinics on being a professional brain health certification course. So I think that really helps give a good understanding and an overview of other modalities that you may not specialize in, but that they're there and they're out there and you get some information. And then working on something that's going to help you learn more about the body as well and how the body processes trauma. So something with somatic, I think would be really helpful. There's lots of modalities out there. How far you take it, I think, depends on how much success you're seeing in your population. But I do think those three areas is really big.
What are they? Brain, body?
Brain, body, trauma.
Okay. And I guess it depends on the kind of counselor you want to be too, right? I think some don't really want to get into trauma. They just want to do the feel-good stuff. So that might be different. But you're saying if you want to work with the people that walk in your door, that those are the areas to become knowledgeable in.
Yes.
Then can you talk a little about neurofeedback? What's that like, or what do you do with that?
Neurofeedback is brain training. So with that one, we're actually pulling a QEEG. We put a cap on and use an amplifier to be able to pull the information on brain waves at different sites. And from there, we're able to look at the different areas of the brain and what's out of balance, out of coherence, that also relates to these symptoms that they're having. And then we set a threshold when we do a training protocol and we start helping train those areas of the brain to get back into a more coherent state between the hemispheres. And then you'll see a reduction in symptoms. So with neurofeedback, I use that a lot with clients that have ADD, ADHD. You can use it with trauma. You can use it with clients that have a lot of dissociation, anxiety, depression, organizational problems, memory problems, insomnia. And so when I have clients that I'm doing neurofeedback with, I'm not saying that they're not a candidate for EMDR, they are. Oftentimes there's a lot of dysregulation. And so their ability to get through the early phases of EMDR is very difficult. And so we may do neurofeedback first, help stabilize, and then we proceed with EMDR, and they tend to work very well together.
Okay.
Not in the same session. It's never enough time, right? But we had a lot of success with that. And so we started off with EMDR at the treatment center I was at, had really wonderful results, but not every client could tolerate getting stabilizing enough to do the processing. We got to reprocessing the trauma. So then we trained in neurofeedback, and we would take that smaller number of clients, do neurofeedback, help stabilize them, and then they were able to get to processing the trauma when we weren't seeing that trend before.
So that's, well, you took the training as you saw a need for that or became interested in it and then developed that.
Yes.
And then I know you're EMDR trained. How did that fit into what you're doing?
With being EMDR trained?
Yeah, what happened there?
Well, actually, when we were kind of allotting all the trainings that year, I did not think EMDR would be successful with this population at all. I mean, we worked with teens in a treatment center that could be really dysregulated, violent, and self-injurious. And so I really thought us going in there and getting them to talk about, these horrible things they'd been through and follow our fingers. I mean, I just felt like we were all going to get punched in the face or laughed at, but it was really amazing. I mean, we sent 3 people to the training and came back and started working with a group of youth that were about to fail the program, and we had really amazing success using EMDR. And so then we trained more of our clinicians, and after the first year ended up training every one of our clinicians that would come through every year. So all the clinicians were able to provide EMDR to all the clients.
And when you say amazing success, what does that look like? What did you see that was different?
Well, I mean, people are still human, right? And you still remember what you've been through. And there's still situations where you don't have anybody that you can go to. And so you're still in the foster care system or still in systems of care that you don't want to be in. But I mean, we would see, like I said, clients that were, I mean, we had notices in, they were going to be picked up because they were not making progress, and they could be very, very violent. And it went down to just verbal aggression, from getting in fights at school every day, assaulting people, much better emotional regulation with being able to kind of get through repair conversations, sometimes even being honest. For some of the clients really struggled with being able to accept responsibility or kind of be honest about their part or their thinking part. They get very activated thinking they're going to be in trouble. So it was just, I just remember a lot of the clinicians would be like, oh my gosh, this is the first time this person's been to school a whole week since they've been here.
Okay.
That kind of thing.
So you saw those kind of changes. Okay. And then, and you said you were trained in trauma-focused CBT.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Can you talk about, do you still use that, or that's something you did for
I
a
do
while?
still use that, yes.
Yeah. How's that go?
So yes, we did trauma-focused CBT, and then there's also we were trained in a couple of other community approaches that are very similar, some similarities to it. I would say it's a base in CBT approach. And then also we trained in dialectical behavioral therapy. And so with all this, we kind of took, it probably doesn't follow the exact trauma-focused CBT model with the amount of sessions and what you're doing each time. But we would use a lot of the skills as far as identifying the thinking errors, teaching, the triangle between the thoughts and the behavior and the emotion, creating awareness, learning how to reframe the thinking. So I still teach a lot of those skills too. I think it's important for clients. A lot of people, they never learn this, especially if their upbringing was hard. They don't learn this. And it's not taught in school. Coping skills are taught. They're not just innate, that we like just come out of the womb and we're like, oh, I gotta breathe. 5 seconds up, hold, 5 seconds down. We're not, you have to be taught these things. And oftentimes when they're taught is after we're having problems and we're not able to handle things in a regulated manner that's appropriate for their age. So I think it's important to teach these skills to all clients, and then hopefully they'll continue to teach other people before there's a problem.
Okay. So you teach about thinking and how that connected to emotions and to bring more awareness to it.
Yes, lots of grounding skills, breath work. I like meditation, focusing the mind.
Okay. Well, have you got anything else for us in this regard about how people can get trained or what they should focus on?
Not off the top of my head. There's so many great trainings. I think that whatever they're looking for, if they do have kind of an identified population, you can find those areas on the brain. There's lots of trainings with the brain and developmental trauma. Right? There's working with the brain and people that are diagnosed with OCD. Same thing with somatic work, whether it's somatic experiencing, or you want to do a trauma-sensitive yoga, or whatever that may be, in working with the body as well. I think you can do that. You can also collaborate with other people that do some of the somatic work that can help you as you continue to learn and practice with.
Well, it just occurred to me, let's talk about the history and preparation workshop, because I know as you were doing EMDR trainings, you noticed that the therapists that seemed to have a harder time learning EMDR are getting started using it. There were a couple of reasons. One is they didn't really have a good history, maybe, or they didn't have a good sense of where to get started or how to manage the emotions or help clients do that. So you put together this workshop. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So yes, you're correct. I found that when I became a consultant, oftentimes my consultees that were coming and they were working with clients, it was hard from their basic training to some of the clients they would be working with and getting overwhelmed or knowing where to start. If the client had a pretty complex history, sometimes they would be eager to start because they're able to advertise that they're doing EMDR now and they didn't really get enough information, so it may not go well. And then also just how do you organize the sequencing They had a lot of information through basic training. So trying to put all that together while practicing and working and all that kind of stuff, it can be hard. So knowing how to organize it and not feel overwhelmed it's constantly what was taking up a lot of the consultation time, which is okay. So what I was really looking at is what are we missing for clinicians newly trained in EMDR that would help them organize and have a pretty systematic approach to starting clients in EMDR where they're getting a thorough history and they're properly prepared for the reprocessing to go as well as possible. Stuff can always come up. And that's where I developed this training off kind of the experience of being a consultant. And again, a lot of the consultation I was doing was for people working with clients of complex PTSD. So the histories were really complex and it could be a bit overwhelming to kind of identify, well, where do I start and how do I identify what's actually a theme? Mm-hmm. So I created this training and started identifying things that I do, looking at what other people do, and then created a lot of forms to help people of what information would you want to get at intake, what assessments possibly would you want to do. I put what I do, other people can do what they want to do, but they kind of see the areas that I'm looking at, right? In capturing what's going on with this person and how that helps us develop this target sequence treatment plan. How do you get the history and identify the memories? And really get a thorough history. Sometimes clients only give you what they think, what makes sense to them. They're not always leaving stuff out on purpose. They just don't think it's part of what the problem is. So having these forms in place where you're asking the question, they won't know to give you what you don't ask. So it helps a new clinician or someone new to EMDR know to check in on these areas and get the information. From then, I created a target sequence treatment plan that helps kind of put all this together that allows you to start organizing however you want to do it based on what's going on with the client, and also track what should be changing as far as progress goes and symptoms per what area that you're working on. And wrote a workbook to go with it too that helps just give some additional information on different areas as you go through getting this information on ways to help further their stabilization, whether they like homework or exercises in session. And felt that really helps people kind of get started and have a really nice way of getting into the EMDR processing and feel organized. Even if there's a break or something happens and they have to stop and regulate because maybe something's going on in the client's life, they can come back to where they left off and know where they left off because they've got this sequence.
This is the therapist can know.
Yes.
We'll say a little bit, because that's a lot of words, a target sequence plan. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what that amounts to?
Yes. So I took how you would typically identify the memories for what you're going to target with EMDR reprocessing. And I created more of a comprehensive treatment plan from it. So this way you can identify what are the overall symptoms they're coming in with. And you can start to section out what work you've done and you organize all the history in themes or in a top 10 list you can choose. And then you also can put in triggers related to either the theme or the memories that you're working on, what future templates are completed. So you're making sure you're getting all three prongs, making sure that you're reevaluating after you finish processing, tracking what's better after you've finished out what you've reprocessed, if anything. If not, what else did we miss? Is there memories that we've missed? Mm-hmm. And then it also includes different ways that you can work in resourcing if they need more preparation. Any of the state change exercises is built in so you as a clinician can have one thing pulled up and see at the end versus just telling them to go to their calm place. You can say, I want you to go to that magical forest. And you'll remember the cue word, which I think helps further them. The container, light stream color, any of that can all be written in. If you do additional ego state work or any of that kind of stuff, there's sections that you can put what work you did. So it's a great way to show what you've done and where you've left off. So it's an easy way to come in each session, being able versus having to open up every note or look through the file. I think it just helps keep everybody organized, helps the client as well.
Do you think it helps the trauma brain of someone who's been in a situation that their brain is has experienced complex trauma, that it helps just as organizing what happened, putting it into themes, I guess, that in itself is helpful. Do you think that makes a difference for the client?
I think it can help. They can always change it if other stuff comes up.
Mm-hmm.
But I think giving them voice and showing them that their voice is being heard. And also it gives them an idea of what to expect, right? So there's a bit of control. They may be finishing out one area. Maybe we worked on some sexual trauma as a child, and now they're going to approach some of the memories around domestic violence in a relationship. They may recognize, I don't know that I'm ready to do that. So can we work on this other stuff and come back to that? And that's fine. But I think knowing what they can anticipate versus just coming in session and being like, oh, this bothered you? Well, let's float that back. Let's go with that. They don't have any anticipation of what that's going to bring up or how intense it could be. I think can be really hard for clients with complex trauma.
So you think the organizing and laying it out, having a plan actually to work from, I mean, what I've noticed, it helps. It's helpful. Makes a difference.
I think it helps. I also think it helps clinicians because if they do abreact, or if they're maybe noticing a spike in symptoms, you have this plan where you can start making sense of it. If they just can be like, oh, since the last session it was terrible, and then you're like, oh no, what do we do? Then I feel like that's where people start like drifting away from doing EMDR, like they're scared of it versus looking at like, well, I wonder why that occurred. Let's see how this makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think people do EMDR and they may become emotional or go somewhere they're not expecting. And then they get scared and then they move away from EMDR. Another thing I think I've noticed, and I know you work with or have worked with newer clinicians, but even older, is people get histories that aren't really good histories, even to the point of saying, so how was your childhood? Oh, it was fine. Everything's fine. Yeah, well, there was a divorce, but, it was fine. Rather than going into it and really developing, well, what did happen? What did go on? What did affect you? That may still be underneath the surface.
Yes. And what I'll hear a lot of times in case presentations is, well, they're coming in for anxiety or depression. Okay, well, when did that start? Well, they said they've always been anxious. Okay. So we need more information.
Right. Yeah.
Right? Like,
yeah.
Yeah. Well, when did they notice that that was different from everybody else's experience? And then what was going on around that time? What was going on prior to that? At some point, it came into their awareness, this is different from what other people around me are dealing with. It's not normal. Therefore, I'm not normal.
That works for a lot of different things, doesn't it? Sexuality, but anxiety, even depression, whatever it is. When did you notice that your life experience is showing up differently than what it seems like for the people around you?
Yes.
It's just
so
funny.
I'm not saying that. Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm not saying that someone wouldn't say, yes, I've always been anxious. Even my parents said that I was born kind of an anxious baby. Okay. So then where does that take you? What was the pregnancy like? Did they have any medical problems as an infant? See, these are all things that they won't know to tell you this, because in their mind, it doesn't make sense that relates to, well, I had GERD as an infant, that relates to them struggling with connecting with people today. You have to ask the questions. You have to know to ask the questions and to trace back what they're saying.
Yeah, it's kind of like someone that says, well, I'm anxious all the time. You go, okay, well, I guess you are. That's a problem, but okay, well, how are we going to deal with it? And you try to deal with it on the level of the anxiousness, which means, I guess it means activation in the autonomic nervous system, right? Rather than trying to figure out, okay, what's underneath this, or where did this start, or what's happening. I think that's one nice thing about EMDR is once you figure these things out, or as you start to unfold them, really, now you can do something with it, with the EMDR, by using that.
Yes.
And then
once they feel some relief,
yeah,
I feel like then the clients really start to improve, because it's one piece they were missing, right? It's not like, oftentimes we're not the first thing they've tried.
Right.
We may not be the last, we're not the first thing.
Right.
And once they feel that like, oh my gosh, I was able to do this, or it wasn't as bad as what it normally is, now they have hope and their confidence improves. And so then it just kind of becomes a snowballing effect where a lot of other things can get better too.
And then how about the preparation? Do you have certain, we do the safe, calm place, but container, do you do light stream with people? How does that go?
I do. I do a lot of preparation. I am someone that I'm not trying to, I want to find the right pace for people, but I do work with people that have very tough histories and they've been through a lot. And I think a big piece is for them to learn that they can regulate themselves. And if I go too quickly, I think that asks a lot of their system. So I like to make sure that they are really well prepared. And I think this stems back from even when I first learned it was time for me to practice and practicum for my basic training. And I had a couple of clients that were willing, and they kind of flew through the checklist, being ready, but one of them wasn't. I think they thought they picked a very safe memory, and it brought up a lot for them, and they never let me do EMDR again. And I felt bad. No, I mean, I didn't cause that, right? The memory itself was there all along, and anytime that got activated, it was going to bring that up. But I wished I would have known more and how to do the preparation, because I think that they would have really benefited from that. They did let me do resourcing with them after. They just wouldn't go back into that trauma memory. So I realized that a lot of people, again, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't regulate well already, you have no idea to really know if you can tolerate these things coming up. So I do like to do a lot of preparation with people. I do safe, calm place. I do container. I do light stream. I do reverse spiral. I like to do resourcing figures as well. I think it's really important for them to have kind of a resource team. So I go through a list of just figures, and then they identify any of them that they find that they maybe have a figure for. And then we resource each one of those in, and then they can also have a kind of rapid response team that comes in at any point in time in processing if they want more than just one. But those things are there, and then they can also use them for daily triggers or annoyances or frustrations. Which one of your resources could you use to help you in dealing with, that boss that doesn't seem to, give you a lot of flexibility on deadlines or things like that. So with that, I do that with preparation, and I kind of outline that in the sequence plan that I have in the training. And then I also like to teach clients wisdom figure. My original theory in family therapy did a lot of work with intuition. And so I've incorporated intuition work with EMDR. So I'll do an intuition exercise with clients, meaningful for them. Then we will resource in that figure. So now they have their own intuitive wisdom.
Okay, good. You touched on one thing that we hadn't mentioned earlier, which was the internal family systems or parts work. Do you do that, or you alluded to it at some point?
I do parts work. I'm not trained in internal family systems, but I have done trainings for parts work in regards to EMDR with some of the EMDR providers that do ego state work. And I really find that very valuable. I do find that most clients have parts. They may not all need parts work to be able to get through processing, but having that training, if you're going to do EMDR, I think is really, really important. And I would add that to my list that I didn't add earlier.
Yeah, that was one we left off. And you went to ego state. There's two things, right? There's ego state and internal family systems. Those are two separate ways to look at the same phenomena, I think.
You can get training in internal family systems with EMDR. There are those trainings listed on the EMDR website. I did more attachment and ego state training is the route that I went for developmental needs. Is what I've done. I haven't done the internal family systems, but I have done other ego state trainings that I still use and find very valuable.
Well, we can wrap up. Well, any final thoughts on what we've talked about today?
I can't think of any other than I just hope that anyone that's out there, coming out newly licensed is as you learn, try to practice, right? And incorporate into what you're doing. If you just go and learn something and then you don't use it, and then you're like, oh yeah, I had that training years ago. I think that can be where that misses. So I always tell people, if you're going to go to the EMDR training, practice. You'll realize, and it's all going to come together. But practice. Don't wait until you have the perfect client to do it with, because you'll find that you don't use it. Same thing with any other training that you go to. Start using it. You called you for a reason.
Right. Okay. All right. Good enough. Thanks. Thanks a lot. Appreciate your.
Thank you.